Tom Granado is the founder and CEO of Atomic Talent, an organizational effectiveness consultancy that helps private investors and their portfolio companies accelerate growth. Tom is an award-winning organizational effectiveness expert with 15 years of experience improving business performance in multiple sectors as an operator and consultant to dozens of portfolio companies. Tom is certified in the Predictive Index, Denison Culture and Leadership Survey, Deeper Signals, and Scientific Selling 2.0. He holds a master's degree in strategic management and international business from Tufts University, a bachelor's degree in political economy from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and a certificate in private equity investments from Oxford University. Because he doesn't have enough going on, he's also completing coursework towards a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology at Harvard University. All right, Tom, let's dive right in. You're the founder CEO of Atomic Talent. Do you want to just give us a general overview of what the company does and how you came about thinking of starting that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kane. It's good to be with you. So Atomic Talent is a human capital advisory. We provide psychometric assessments, workforce analytics, and the genesis of it is pretty simple. There's an urgent need to help companies improve their organizational effectiveness in this so-called VUCA world, right? Where there are enormous disruptions all around us and the pace of change is constantly accelerating. So I wanted to create a suite of services that help business leaders to get their arms around some of these challenges. So supply chain disruptions, accelerating technological change that we're all experiencing, this intensifying so-called war for talent, growing pressure to address things like ESG, all of that alongside the macroeconomic challenges, some of which you could argue are cyclical, but this looming slowdown or recession, inflation, obviously, steeply rising interest rates, all of the geopolitical stuff. Businesses need help to figure out how to orchestrate people and talent to address all of these things effectively. And we exist to help organizations do that through both the insights, the assessments that I mentioned, but also through training and upskilling, specifically managers, leaders, and also salespeople.
Great. And the psychometric assessments, when we first got in touch a while back, that was one thing that interested me a lot about what you do. Mm-hmm. Can you dive into that just a little bit?
Yes. So just a quick step back. I was somebody who had pretty meaningful misgivings about psychometric assessments. Wasn't sure that they were terribly useful. The way I had seen them used is essentially you invest anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes more than that, to take one of these things. And then if you're lucky, you have an interesting conversation about it with somebody who knows what they're looking at. But then it would go in a drawer. So you'd have a good conversation, you'd ask some questions, you'd maybe learn some things or connect some dots, and then nothing would really be done with it from the perspective of improving your development planning, improving team dynamics or interpersonal dynamics, improving hiring decisions or succession planning, promotion decisions. I didn't see how that data was really being incorporated well. I believe Bridgewater, which is a place where I cut my teeth on this stuff, did it much, much better and more compellingly than most organizations where I had seen these things used. But even Bridgewater, I think, was still working through the early days when I was there. This was 10 plus years ago, of trying to incorporate valid and reliable assessments into their decision making. But then I found an assessment called the Predictive Index, which is not perfect, but it is the most efficient, valid, and reliable assessment that I'd come across. And validity and reliability, I encourage your listeners to dig into those concepts because they're critical. If anybody recommends an assessment that does not carry that, those markers of validity and reliability, then run away. Don't use it. So, it's 6-minute assessment on the behavioral side of things, so the personality side of things. You get some key insights into important workplace behaviors. So how do you delegate? How do you tend to make decisions, right? Do you tend to want to come to an independent analysis yourself and then announce that or share that? Or do you like to build through consensus? So solicit input from others, take that data and arrive more inductively at a decision. Those are key differences. Do you tend to be more of a risk taker, or do you tend to be more of a risk averse kind of, do you take a protect the business posture, right? So, that risk tolerance thing gets thrown around a lot, but what we really mean is how much certainty do you need before making a decision? That turns out to be a really big deal when you're trying to assess whether somebody's going to handle a certain set of responsibilities excellently. Pace, how well do you deal with accelerated pace and pressure that comes with that? Are you somebody who thrives with that and needs it, or somebody who prefers to be a bit more responsive, right, to your stakeholders and want a bit more time to process things and turn things over in your mind a few times? And there are others. And so these are really interesting and important markers to look for when you're assessing somebody for a particular role, a hiring decision or promotion decision, but also just in a coaching context, right? So it's not just that point of decision. It's also, how do I help someone to thrive on a week-to-week basis? How do I help them arrive at more sustained clarity about how to prioritize things and cut through problems and cut through confusion, right? And help them just to get clear on what matters and what doesn't. So it's proved to be a very helpful tool to bring to the party for leaders. And then, of course, for my consulting business, I find that businesses are really craving efficient, valid, and reliable insights.
I imagine, so the insights are one thing, and in our experience too on the human capital side, it's like, it's one thing to gather all the insight. It's another thing to be able to know what to do with the data and the insight. And in your experience, do you find that there's a gap there too when it comes to these psycho kind of metric assessments? Or is it a little bit smoother than kind of bigger org dev kind of stuff?
It's a great point you raise. I do worry about these assessments falling into the wrong hands, so to speak. Superpowers can be used for good and evil. It's really important that whoever's using them is well trained, understands the underlying science to a threshold level. Not all of us can be psychometricians, but to understand what the assessment results are saying, and importantly, what they're not saying, to not over-index on it, right? To be clear that this is one data point, it's one input. It should never be used in a binary way. It's really, really important to use them well. At the same time, I think there's a risk on the other side, which is relying too much on individual heuristics and biases to make these choices, right? I work with and meet lots of leaders who will say, well, I've got a pretty good track record of hiring the right people and assigning the right things. And look, I have no way to validate that. But, even if that's true, you never really know the counterfactual. You never know the opportunity cost, right? And so, my view is use valid and reliable insights to inform the conversation. Be very clear about why you're using it, how you expect the data to help, and what it's saying and what it's not saying. And, I think in a lot of contexts, this data it's truly, as I said before, it is truly most valuable when you're helping people to just make sense of a rapidly dynamic, changing environment, and just helping them to see themselves more clearly and not misdiagnose things. So one of my mentors, Jeff Hunter at Talentism, would always describe how easy it is and how often we see leaders slip into the bad, stupid, lazy, the quote, bad, stupid, lazy narratives about people, right? You sort of ascribe malice to situations where there is none. It's actually just confusion. And so these insights can help leaders to kind of see things for what they are more clearly, right? So maybe it's not that somebody is incompetent or doesn't have strong answers or analysis. They're actually just fearful of presenting that analysis in certain environments for very natural reasons, right? They don't want rejection. They don't want to be told they're wrong, right? And so that lack of confidence can be misperceived as a lack of competence. And that's obviously not what we want. So that's a very simple example, but just unlocking that and having a conversation with an employee that honors the fact that they maybe don't have that extroversion or that urgency to connect with other people, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that they are incapable of sharing their ideas and bringing compelling new ideas to their colleagues and to their customers. Does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. How do organizations, in your experience, do this kind of work at scale? Because I imagine it's a lot of work for even just to do this at an individual level.
Yeah.
And then to get it right.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mentioned earlier some of the misgivings that I had about this stuff. You know, the fact that an assessment can go in a drawer and not be seen again is a problem. For me, for these to be truly useful, they have to scale. There has to be a platform. It has to be tech enabled. And so I choose tools that do that. The way that I've seen this be most effective, and the reason I love the predictive index, for example, but there are others, is a tool called job modeling or job assessment. And so how that works is you have basically two sides of this, right? You have the individual assessment side, so a personality assessment, a learning agility assessment that's focused on the individual. They will take that assessment. But then on the other side, if call it the demand side of it, you have hiring managers and stakeholders who know a particular job or a set of responsibilities or a challenge that needs to be addressed. They know it really well. Using the same underlying science and platform, they can model the job, right? Answer a series of questions about the nature of the problems, the nature of the responsibilities to establish a standard of excellence. What are we actually looking for here? Right? Well, and it shouldn't be everything, right? It shouldn't be the kitchen sink. It should be, what are those critical few things that this incumbent is going to need to address for this period of time? And so what that does is allow us to compare the individual's result, right? That supply side, if you like, to that demand side, right? And say, okay, this individual's got this set of attributes, this job or this set of responsibilities requires this set of attributes. What is the probability of success when we compare those two things? And so you probably heard me mention this at least once already. It's really important for me to caveat this and be very clear. We never want to oversimplify this analysis, right? It should never be binary. We should never be saying they need to be a perfect 10 out of 10 fit in order for us to move forward. This is always about probabilities, right? So in other words, in a lot of sales jobs, as an example, one of the things we measure is dominance, right? The extent to which someone really needs to have individual control, right? They need to put their thumbprint on things. They want to be in control of their own destiny. What we see is very high positive correlation between a high dominance score and success in especially outside sales roles, right? And the reasons are probably obvious. Now, does that mean that somebody with low dominance or maybe midpoint level dominance cannot be successful in sales? Of course not. But it's about probabilities. And so if you're comparing, a series of candidates, that's going to be an important factor to discuss, so that if you're deciding, okay, I want to go with somebody with that lower dominance I, as the hiring manager, know what I'm signing up for. And I have my playbook. I'm starting to build my playbook for onboarding them, but also coaching them to say, I'm going to need you to get more comfortable with a quota, right? With a leadership or a leaderboard rather, right? Comparing your performance to others and really taking ownership of that production. And a lot of times we'll find that the people who have that lower dominance, but are really inspired to be in a sales role for whatever reason, right? They're really motivated or incentivized to be in a sales role. They're quite comfortable flexing up that dominance in order to make that work, right? As an example. But it's about probabilities, right? And so it informs the conversation.
That's really interesting. And because what I imagine is once you get the assessments done at an individual level, you almost have to then assess the management level to see if they mirror. Because I imagine, you know, what you said there about the outside sales role. If you've got a team that, let's say, isn't dominant, but maybe they're more methodical, for example, that's going to require a different kind of leadership to manage them. So I can see how this steps up an organization. Quite interesting. That's right. Bit of an aside, Tom. I mean, there's been a big rush to AI. I mean, everybody kind of knows about it. Has there been one for you to enable this stuff at scale?
For me personally, I am quite curious to see how this evolves. I think the AI, the most interesting applications have been, if you look at the work of Josh Bersin and interesting companies like Gloat and Eightfold AI, we're looking at the prediction. It's more of a skills focused, and they're looking at how do we actually look at a person's resume, their history, their LinkedIn, other sources of data to try to confirm what skill set they actually have and predict what types of jobs and what types of skills remits this person's likely to handle well. I think there's a lot of interesting work there that I'm keeping an eye on to see how strong those predictions are from a skills perspective. From where I sit, which is less focused on skills, but more focused on sort of the innate, natural kind of hardwiring. I'm watching the space. I haven't seen much of a rush to incorporate AI there. Now, I find it fascinating just personally for my business to be able to aggregate and assess research on these issues faster, right? So in other words, like, it is very difficult to canvas the universe of peer-reviewed research on something like, you know, this is total nerding out, but general mental ability, which is a tremendous construct in my field, which looks at essentially, just think of it as the rate at which people learn and process complexity and new information, right? So learning agility is a really big deal. I would argue it's a bigger deal than personality, right? When you're thinking about someone's performance, especially in complex jobs. So the ability to kind of use, you know, something like ChatGPT or other AI tools to aggregate that research and summarize that research is extremely helpful to make sure that we're not missing important updates, right? Important validity studies, for example, that are coming down the pike. But it's a great question, and you know, I'd like to be able to update that answer going forward, because I think it's just such a dynamic space.
Sure, for sure. You primarily work with portcos, PE firms. Why did you pick that as your angle?
Part of it is just the energy, the urgency that is inherent to the space, right? Both, you know, private equity, but venture capital as well. I find that there's, especially in emerging markets, I find that there's a hunger for an edge. There's a real openness to how these insights can help them to accelerate performance, but also avoid costly decisions, right? Like mishires or, you know, poorly timed promotions and things like that. So that's part of it. You know, pragmatically from a business strategy perspective, developing good relationships with GPs essentially extends my business development. They will make introductions to portfolio companies or to colleagues in the venture space who are dealing with similar challenges. And so it enables me to just broaden my reach beyond, my firm, but yet beyond my individual outreach. So that's another part of it. But I think the most important thing is, especially in the venture space, those are companies that are working on emerging technologies that are trying to solve really interesting problems, or even if they're replicating a business model or technology from a more established market in an emerging market, just seeing how that technology and how that business can impact those economies and those communities and that labor market, it's all just intellectually fascinating to me. And so that's why I tend to gravitate toward the space.
Got it. So I'm going to try and tap into your private markets insight here, but if you, we're all very familiar with the big public tech companies and the big layoffs that they've done over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And in order to have to right size means you've probably wrong sized at some point. Are you seeing the same kind of trend in the private markets with companies that you've worked with or that you have your eye on in terms of kind of over time, maybe catalyzed by COVID, their organizational effectiveness kind of going down?
I think the exuberance over the last several years has impacted everyone. Everyone was trying to capitalize on, low interest rates, essentially free money to do more, to grow, to capitalize. And so I haven't seen very many companies that didn't at least slightly overextend themselves in terms of hiring. It was somewhat opportunistic. But the reality is that I think there's a massive overcorrection. I think people get scared. The first thing they want to do is cut where there seem to be obvious places to cut. And my view is that these companies, a lot of leaders, instead of channeling that fear into let me de-risk, I would encourage them to think about, how do I actually squeeze the balloon a little bit, right? How do I actually build out a more robust, dynamic internal talent marketplace and try to reallocate talent to other challenges and opportunities? And I think this starts to get into a bit of the paradigm shift that I and others have been calling for a while, which is less focus on an individual's resume, their sort of linear development path, the titles that they've held, and frankly, the skill set that they have today, and focusing more on potential. And how do we help people to build new skills, adapt, right? Grow their ability to drive value and create value. And I think that, I mentioned general mental ability earlier. Having an understanding of how someone learns, how they process new information, is a really important competitive advantage for companies, because you can make probabilistic bets on people to learn these new skills and adapt so that you can reallocate them. And those companies, I think, are the ones that are going to have more resilience. They're going to be able to retain top talent. They're going to have a reputation for being a place where you can go and grow your career and feel like you're not going to be put into a lane, and be constantly expected to stay in that lane, right? And kind of have a siloed linear path. And so I find an interesting gap between what's going on. Like if you just track some of the conversations on LinkedIn and kind of the zeitgeist there's a lot of aspirational talk about this paradigm shifting, right? And it being more toward, potential, right? And empowering the employee. But in my experience, and in the conversations that I have personally, I still see a lot of latching on to the old paradigm, right? And sort of the resume-based hiring and sort of that linear evaluation, and not as much willingness to bet on potential. Part of it is they don't have the tools to make the probabilistic bets, and that's where we come in, and that's where we're trying to help.
Which companies in your experience or that you watch do this the best?
Yeah, I think there are companies, big companies like that. We were just talking about this the other day at dinner with some friends. Wegmans is notorious in a good way for the way that they allow their people to kind of experiment, right? Kind of the same way Google was known for giving their employees that 20% free time or whatever. For giving, a baker, somebody in the pastry department, the freedom to kind of create, to come up with something new, to delight their customers. That's cool. I love that. And you can see it in their engagement scores. You can see it in their employee satisfaction, that people really love when their organization will bet on them, to use their skills and their talent freely to, create something that will delight their customers, as opposed to, here's the remit, here's the assignment, just execute. I think many people relish when their manager or their organization says, we want to tap into your brain, your creativity, what you can bring to the party, not necessarily what we've already got in store, right? And I think that's cool. And you see all sorts of examples like that in companies, large and small. I think the principle is the organizations that understand the source of performance, right? The source of where does high performance really come from, which is this alignment between someone's natural wiring, right? Their sort of natural mental model and strengths, how they approach the things I discussed earlier. So how they approach decision-making, pace, how they problem solve, how much detail they need in their work, how they are they more of a natural coach, teacher, share of information, or do they tend to be more of a critical thinker, problem solver, right? Who wants to focus on the objective reality, not necessarily on the people reality or the feelings, et cetera. And people who understand that the learning agility is going to be a critical factor in understanding whether somebody's going to thrive, and really invest in understanding those things. And then on the, call it the demand side of things, are committed to modeling their jobs and modeling their culture, and trying to find and constantly reevaluating the alignment between those individuals and those teams and the environment. They're the ones who tend to have higher engagement scores. They have, it shows up in EBITDA, right? It shows up in the financials. And so, those are the companies that I get really excited about. The ones I'm closest to are my clients who, I, for obvious reasons, won't discuss the details of their operations, but they're the ones that I get most excited about and, would put my endorsement behind.
Sounds good. Make a prediction, Tom, of the next 12, 24 months, because you touched on the war for talent earlier. What are you projecting? Do we see unemployment tick up? Or what happens in the labor market over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think, this isn't a hot take by any stretch, but companies are increasingly, and this shows up in the survey data for both, private equity GPs, for example, and also portfolio company executives, that they're struggling to find the skills that they need immediately. And my view is, as you probably gathered, is that the companies that are able to invest in that rapid dynamic upskilling and have a sense of, the probabilities that certain individuals and teams are going to be able to develop those skills quickly and deploy those skills quickly, those are the ones that are likely to win. So companies are trying to do more with less. They're investing in technology. They're investing in automation. That's not a new story. Generative AI obviously is now is disrupting industries that historically have not been touched as much by automation. And so I think that trend will continue. We will see more of a need for this human augmentation, so to speak, right? This more people are going to have to figure out how to use this technology to make themselves more productive in the short term, but also to perceive areas where they'll need to upskill, right? And of course, their managers and their leaders, I believe, have a responsibility to help them see that clearly and make that investment. But I encourage everyone that I talk to not to wait for their company or for their manager to see that and help them with that. There's so many tools available that are often low cost or no cost to upskill, right? To just improve your game, to widen your aperture. And I think, this sort of learning mentality is going to be a competitive advantage for people. And I think those people will find themselves more marketable and being presented with more interesting and compelling opportunities in their career.
Wonderful. Where can people find you, Tom? Where would you like people to go?
atomictalent.io. That is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course, and I love to hear from people. Please drop me a line, challenge my assumptions, teach me, ask questions. I'm going to be producing more content in the coming months, and I invite people to follow us, react, share whatever you think is worth sharing, and we'll be doing some webinars, free webinars as well, to help people to use some of this data that we provide just to make more informed decisions and to become more effective colleagues and coaches. So that's the mission here, is to just be helpful and to continue to provide insights that we think are going to help people to thrive. So welcome insights and feedback from all walks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Ken.
Tom Granado is the founder and CEO of Atomic Talent, an organizational effectiveness consultancy that helps private investors and their portfolio companies accelerate growth. Tom is an award-winning organizational effectiveness expert with 15 years of experience improving business performance in multiple sectors as an operator and consultant to dozens of portfolio companies. Tom is certified in the Predictive Index, Denison Culture and Leadership Survey, Deeper Signals, and Scientific Selling 2.0. He holds a master's degree in strategic management and international business from Tufts University, a bachelor's degree in political economy from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and a certificate in private equity investments from Oxford University. Because he doesn't have enough going on, he's also completing coursework towards a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology at Harvard University.